I don't know about you, but back in, third or fourth grade, one of the frequently heard phrases from the teacher to the troublemaker in class, I'm not admitting to that label, by the way, was stop clowning around. Well, you're going to hear that phrase a couple times today because our conversation actually centers around a movement called Stop Clowning Around. In fact, the website is stopclowningaround.com. And here to help us kind of make sense out of all of that is Scott Holman, who is the founder, the CEO, the man behind Stop Clowning Around. How are you? It's good to see you.
Oh, I'm doing great, and I thank you for this opportunity. I love the name of the show because what I've come to learn is everybody's looking to make a big impact in the world. Deep down, every single heart wants to make an impact and be remembered. That's the legacy. And so I appreciate being a part of this with you.
Well, I'm glad you're here. And by the way, I have to catch myself. I just said it's good to see you. A lot of people are listening to us in podcast form or on the radio, but you and I are connecting on Zoom, which is how all of life is done these days. And it's also a reminder that I frequently ask our listeners to send in their suggestions for guests that we should have on the program because we like to feature inspiring stories, oftentimes of people that we wouldn't otherwise have met. And so a couple of years ago, we told the story of Zach Tomlinson on this show, young man who went from being an all-state wrestler to being paralyzed in a diving accident. And he's the one who sent me your information a couple months ago, and then you and I have been chasing each other around for quite some time. So thank you to Zach, and thank you to all the listeners who send in ideas for inspiring stories. So now, Scott, the burden is on us to inspire them, right? That's the next step in all this.
Let's do it.
Well, let's do it by getting into what Stop Clowning Around is all about.
Well, a lot of people always sit there and say, what's in the name? And you gave a great story. When I was younger, I ended up being a part of a clown ministry that my parents ran, working with children. And I heard that phrase a lot. It just became a part around my house because I was a clown and stopped clowning around. And as I grew up into my adult life, I didn't have a whole lot of direction. I didn't know what my calling was. I grew up in a church environment and I heard about this calling and it seemed so mystical, but yet here I am as a young adult and I can't figure it out. And what am I supposed to do with my life? And there's just so many unknowns. It took me so long to get together. And what I've realized, it's not that difficult. We need to do a better job of just helping others understand what that process looks like. And then stop clowning around and just take the action and do it because God does have a plan and there is an impact for you to make. So that's the big picture of Stop Clowning Around. It's just to help people take that step, overcome the fear and overcome excuses and become what God's made them to be. I often say, stop clowning around and be the master of your show because that's what you're designed to be.
You mentioned a phrase very quickly that you used to be part of a clown ministry. And for you, that sounds normal. For most of our listeners, that was one of those moments where their eyebrows went up. They're like, did he just say clown ministry? So fill in some of the details on that because that's not common.
Well, it was actually more of a puppet ministry that my parents started, and they would go church to church and just share the gospel through puppets for kids, and all the focus was on kids. Actually, I say that. A lot of times they'd be in an elderly care center, and so just ministering through the art of puppets. And I was actually too young to be a part of the group, but I wanted to be. And one day they came home, and they were just recapping from their event, and they started talking about the fact that, it'd be great if we had a clown. And I had no idea what a clown was, but I saw my open door. I'm like, I'll do it. And so I just ended up learning the art of clowning. It's not, I tell you, I'm sad because I don't get to do it much. Hollywood, let's say, they've really destroyed the art of clowning.
The clown has become creepy.
It has, and it's so sad because the art really is fantastic. And the art was meant to bring smiles to faces of people. And to be a part of that and explore that art was a fantastic part of my life. There's still an inner clown inside of me, but again, that art has been destroyed a little bit. Most see the clowns in a negative side and not the positives anymore.
Let's back up a little bit. You mentioned that your parents had this ministry, but as part of your story, their story is interesting as well. Your dad was a Vietnam veteran, and really wrestled with PTSD, as so many veterans did and still do. How did that play itself out in your home?
Honestly, I was never abused in any way, but there was an extreme volatility. So I didn't have much of a connection with my dad growing up, and really to this day, I still don't. I love him, but to say I have that connection that I have with my sons and want them to have with me, it just didn't exist because of that PTSD, and it wasn't his fault. And as I've matured, I've been able to understand that a little more. We at the time of this recording, Veterans Day was just a week or so ago, and I just want to honor the veterans, because we tend to honor those who have passed away in war. What we fail to do is recognize that many of these veterans, although they didn't die a physical death, a lot of them have sacrificed their life based on what they'll experience the remainder of their life. And we just tend to ignore that. We just tend to say, it's deep stuff, it's hard stuff. But there's a lot of men, there's a lot of women who are struggling, who sacrificed their life even though they're still alive. And that's what I recognize that. And I appreciate my dad. I appreciate my mom, because they did everything they could with what he was dealing with.
Mom worked hard. Dad had trouble maintaining employment through all of that, right? So it's not like money, money wasn't everywhere within the household. You guys struggled to make ends meet. And then you go off to college, and then it's time to work. And I love to learn what I would consider to be decisive turning point moments in the life of someone with a powerful story. And in reading some of your background, I know you had one of those moments inside, of all places, a chemical factory that really, if I understand it correctly, really helped either focus or maybe redirect entirely your path. Can you set the scene? How did you end up in a chemical factory? And then what was this moment?
Well, yeah, so I was a young man. Schooling wasn't the big part of our life. I went to school, but there wasn't a huge part of why that was important. We ended up with this scenario of, I just knew I was supposed to go to college, but yet it didn't work for me. And so who needs school? I'll just get a job. And, that's a rough go, by the way. And I ended up in a chemical plant, and it paid basically minimum wage, maybe a few cents more than that. But it was a job. And at that age, that's what I needed. And I hated it, and I was miserable. But I also didn't have confidence of really knowing who I was. And there was this truck driver who would come periodically, and he was a Christian man. Slender man, white hair. I'm telling you all these details because I don't know his name. And I think that's a really critical point here. We don't know who we're inspiring. A lot of times we say things, we don't recognize the impact. He will probably never know.
Yeah, but you remember the moment very clearly, don't you?
Very clearly. I loaded his truck. I'm on a forklift. I loaded his truck. I backed it up, and we're just having this conversation. And he just looked at me and said, "What are you doing here anyway?" And well, that's my job. Of course I'm here. And I took work seriously, by the way. So I took pride in my work, regardless of what it was. And he said, no, man, you're as white collar as they come. I see it all over you. Why are you here? And I got to be very clear. There's not this thought that white collar is better than blue collar or anything like that. It's my calling was probably more in a white collar space than where I was in that field. And I'll actually say there's a lot of people working behind the desk that would actually do better in a blue collar role too. So I want to make sure that's so clear. But it wasn't my calling. And he called me out on it. And it made me say, wait a minute, this guy actually sees something in me. If he sees something in me, I should see something in myself. And it put me on the path of going back to college. I took night school for a total of 8 years, because once I got an undergrad, I'm like, hey, let's get a master's degree. And so I took that on through. But no, that moment was life-changing, and I don't even know the guy's name.
Why do you think that had such an impact on you? If you already had, and I think this is important for people who are wrestling with where they are in life, whatever that definition is, why do you think it took those words to spur you to action when you already had that fire burning inside of you? Why did it take some other person's input to change you?
All right. If you're ready to go a little deep here. So inside, I think we all know that there's some value in us, but yet every single one of us are seeking at some level, usually a deep level, the appreciation and approval of others. I think if you look at purpose in general, the reason we do about anything, if you want to keep digging into that 7 layers deep, you're going to find that the reason we're doing most things is because we're seeking the approval of others, the acceptance of others, and trying to find our value and worth. And to have someone else, a stranger, see something in me, I think that was it. I knew it was there, but someone else saw it. Someone that wasn't my mom and dad. Someone else that wasn't someone that had to see it, They saw it, and it was just the inspiration that I needed to move forward.
Well, I do think there are a lot of people who are unsettled in wherever they are, not sure what to do next, and so they almost settle for being unsettled. And it's a sad thing to see that. And I remember, this is not my illustration. This did not happen in my own life. I remember hearing this story shared by a well-known author, and I'm telling you, Scott, I cannot remember his name, or I'd gladly give him credit. But he was out to breakfast with a wealthy businessman in their town. The businessman was considering making a donation to the foundation that this speaker represented. And they were kicking around this theory that if just given the opportunity to change a direction in a life, that somebody would take it and thrive in that new opportunity. So he said, for instance, when our waitress comes back, I'm going to ask her a question, and you just listen and see what you think. So the waitress came back, and the wealthy businessman said to the server, what would you be doing if you weren't doing this? And she said, oh, I've always wanted to be a nurse. He said, oh, so you did not set out as your career goal to be a waitress? No, I really don't like it that much, but I have 2 kids and I'm a single mom and I don't have the opportunity. He said, so if somebody were to somehow make it possible for you to go and pursue that dream of yours, would you do it? And she, well, man, I mean, it's the cost, and then there's the child care, and then there's all this. And he said, I'm not asking you I'm not asking you hypothetically if you would. I'm asking you if you literally would, if somebody said, here is the money needed for that. And she said, well, I don't know why you're messing with me like this. It's not very nice. And he said, I'm telling you right now that I'll take care of all those expenses for you if you'll go pursue your dream. And of course, she didn't believe it at first, and then eventually she just broke down in tears. And the story ends with her going and getting her nursing degree, and literally a life was changed because one man who had resources was willing to invest in somebody else's life. And the moral to the story, of course, is it only takes one person to take a moment. It doesn't have to be a financial investment. It could be a word of wisdom like you experienced. And we undervalue in our culture people with that amount of wisdom and that amount of selflessness, where they can see in other people something of value, and recognizing value in someone else is a vastly underappreciated characteristic these days. We'll talk more about that in a moment as we continue with Scott Holman here on The Big Impact. We are back on The Big Impact with Scott Holman. His website, by the way, is stopclowningaround.com. And you heard a little bit of his origin story in the first few minutes of the program. And Scott, now you've taken all of that experience and kind of turned it into a leadership training program for others. How did that come about? When did you have this idea that I could, corral all of my experiences and try to invest them in other people?
I think it comes down to I think purpose moves through 3 major steps in life. The first step, and you could actually follow Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's very similar, and there's a survival step, and you're just trying to make the way for yourself. Then you move to a level of pursuit of success, and then you probably attain that success, or many attain that success and realize, wait, that's it? So then you move to the next level of significance. You just want to make an impact in the world. And that's the realization of 20 plus years of a lot of experience. I now want to just give back. I want to be able to help others. And what's deepest in my heart is it took me a long time to figure out what I know, a lot of books I read, a lot of errors I made. And if I would have had someone that would have helped guide me along the way at the earlier ages, I would be a lot further along than I even am now. And so that's really the desire behind what I do. It's just to help these young professionals find their path much sooner than I did. And that's the goal of my recent book. It's the goal of the programs. It's the goal of everything. Just, hey, figure it out sooner. As long as you're willing to invest in yourself and grow, you really can master your show. You can be whatever you want to be.
Being willing to invest in yourself is an interesting thought for us to explore for a moment or two here. I'm saddened by the number of people who don't think they are worth investing in themselves. And there are a lot of people who, for whatever reason, perhaps they've been told that, and maybe they just have never really developed the sense of worth, or maybe they don't have the foundation in faith that tells them in very clear language, you were made in God's image, you matter to Him, and you matter to others. It's sad when you see someone who thinks they don't matter. Are you coming across that very often?
I think that's probably one of the number one problems in our world is people don't have value in their self or worth in their self. And I'll share in a moment what I really think is called value-based business, a model I use, and it's a key factor. But at the core of value-based business is really the reality that most people don't find worth in themselves. To jump back, though, before I dive into that, that idea of investing in yourself, this is one of those things I wish I would have known sooner. I love Dave Ramsey. A lot of people are probably familiar with Dave Ramsey. And when you look at all these financial models, what you're going to see a lot of times is you want to give 10%, invest 10%, then live off the rest. All right, that's fine. If you are someone who's really going down that pursuit of wealth path, you realize you want to invest more than 10%. All right, that's fine. And then it was, I think it's Dan Miller with 48 Days to the Work You Love. I was listening to his podcast one day, and he threw out a different idea. This was years ago that, it's 10%, and 3% investment in yourself, whether that be books, whether that be courses, whether that be seminars. And he even gave a little bit, or at least I consumed it with a little of the idea of, even if you can't do an additional 3, instead of doing 10% of investment, invest 7 in your 401k and 3% in yourself, because that's the best investment you can make. And I'm a growth mindset person, so I just believe in that model, and it's not shared a lot. So hopefully someone might take that piece.
Yeah, well, let's define that. What does investment in yourself look like? What could fall under that 3%?
Okay, selfish promotion. My book's right next to me here. A lot of times, especially if you're, me in my 20s, I didn't have a lot of money. So you're going and you're looking at a $20 book and you're like, man, I just don't have that. And the problem is you start to look at it as a cost, not an investment. An investment's going to return the money back to you. And so anything that you can take on that has the ability to return back by reading this book, maybe I get better at my job, which means I get a raise, or I get another job, or I get to move up that career ladder. All those are things that's going to return back. So maybe it's a book in the early stages. Man, online courses are all over the place. Podcasts are free, and you can get an immense education on YouTube, and a podcast takes longer to find it, but it's free. But you can then start up-leveling mastermind groups. There's coaches or seminars. You can go on and on and on. But don't look at it as a cost. Look at it as an investment in your growth, because that money is going to come back.
There's also some investment you can make that has no price tag attached to it whatsoever. You can force yourself to get healthier. You can take some time just to go to bed earlier and feel better physically as you make it throughout the day. Or perhaps some of that investment in oneself is connected to improving/changing the circle of influence that you walk in. In other words, maybe you've got some toxic relationships that are dragging you down. And in that case, maybe that investment in oneself is, I need to make some changes in the people with whom I'm spending time. It takes a lot of different
Absolutely.
directions, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And if you look at the Wheel of Life, I think it was made popular by Zig Ziglar, but there's 7 spokes in it, but it can be broken down into 3 key areas of life, focusing on our health, our wealth, and our relationships. And they all have to be in balance. If they get out of balance, if your health is bad, you're not going to succeed in the other areas. So it's all important. And find yourself valuable enough to grow and stretch.
When you sat down to put all these thoughts together in written form, and the book and the website are both called Stop Clowning Around. When you sat down to put all this stuff into written form, did you find yourself amazed at the lessons that you've learned? You're not that old. You're not a sage 97-year-old like my father-in-law who can tell you about what life was like during World War II. It amazes me frequently at the number of really powerful life lessons I've been taught if I just sit down and think about them for a while. There's been a lot of really powerful stuff that's come my way, both from family and friends and interviews and things like that. Was it hard to put it all into paper?
It wasn't, but and I think this goes so right along with your show. I think I discounted my own story. Because it was my story, I didn't think it was that inspirational. It was that powerful. It was just Scott's story. I hear other stories and I'm like, man, that's awesome. That's great. This one's mine. And to work with other people and start putting it on paper and start working through this with others and to hear them say, the meat of this is your story. It's not what you know, it's your story. I think that was the aha moment for me. We all have a story. Not just me, not just you. We all have a story, and our stories relate to other people. So if we go relational again, at the end of the day, I'm not going to relate to every human being out there. They need you, listener, to share your story because there's a relatability factor that has to happen. And if we're all sharing our story, then that's when we can have a big impact on the world.
Our guest on The Big Impact is Scott Holman. His book is called Stop Clowning Around. His website is stopclowningaround.com. And Scott, Mark Twain said it very well. The 2 most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. Mm-hmm. Would you be bold enough to say you have figured out why?
Sometimes I have to remind myself of that, but yes, I would say I figured out my why.
What is it?
And exactly what that means. This might be on the website. They can find it. It sounds kind of corny, but it's a way I can remember it. But I'm a father of 4, and I take my role of being a dad very seriously. And I looked at all the components that I really feel are important in someone having a successful life. And again, I focus on career and leadership a lot, but leadership, just to stop there for a second, leadership is really about leading yourself first, your family second, and then your business. We get that all backwards. And if you don't build the foundational stuff first, the business is going to ultimately crash in. So, I go along this and say, where is this success factor at and what all are needed? And I broke it down into an acronym that stands for DADDY. Again, I know it may sound corny, but DADDY to me, I can look at the D. It's my why to help people discover their potential. And I do that a lot through DISC. I'm a DISC consultant, and I can really identify who you are, shine a mirror on how God created you. And your calling's not so mystical as much as it is you have a design to be a part of a body. Find your place and be excellent at that. The next is to activate potential by finding your purpose. That's the A. The next D is to be able to define a plan and a process that you can move along to achieve your goals. The 4th D is to develop the skills needed in order to succeed. And by the way, for me, if you go to the book, you're going to see a lot on the soft skills. The relational skills are where it's at. And then so that's the D, and I focus on that. And then the Y comes back to just as you said. It's stands for the WHY, to help everyone else find their why and live it.
The relational skills aspect of that really jumps out at me because it seems to be the largest gap in skills in our culture today. We're smart.
Absolutely.
We are a smart country. I mean, the innovation, the technological developments, the creativity, whether it's in a tangible good like a tablet or a new phone or whatever, where the phone has more computing power than 2 mission controls did back in the days of Apollo 11, all those different things from a tangible standpoint, we're really pretty good at. I mean, they developed a vaccine for COVID in an incredible short window of time. It's just, I mean, if it all plays out well, it's stunning. But we're not anywhere nearly as accomplished in getting along with and interacting with other people. If you don't believe me, just look at the news headlines from the nights of burning, looting, and rioting, when a simple discussion really should have replaced all of that mess. How did we get so bad at relational impact one to another?
My theory, it's just an opinion. I think that we just assume that people pick it up in their upbringing. If you study the mind, the conscious and subconscious mind, that you'll know that the subconscious mind, which is where our habits and actions flow out of, most of the time is fully developed by 7. So that develops our perspectives. We're raised up in a family environment, and that's where we learn our relational skills. Problem is, we're living in a society where the family's broken in a lot of cases. People are not learning how to relate to people naturally in a family environment. And so then they come up and they end up in a leadership role. Guess what? Leadership is all about leading people. It's the relational aspect, and they don't know how. So we're asking people to lead customers or lead employees when they don't know how to relate to their own family in the first place, because no one's ever taught it to them. And so I think that's really where we're at. It's a teaching standpoint. And it's something that we never really thought about, the fact that we have to teach others to do this, but we do. It's not just naturally learned.
What's the solution? How does one get past that? Because if the current climate of interpersonal dysfunction continues, then the next generation of leaders will inherit that dysfunction, and that cycle is just going to keep on going. So do you have any suggestions for how we can get better at that?
I think the first thing I would say is I think you'll hear people say, well, I'm not a people person. I think you have to debunk the myth that it's a natural thing. People aren't naturally good or naturally bad. They were naturally raised in an environment that made them look good or made them look bad, but they're not naturally good or bad. This is a science and an art that actually can be learned. The idea of connecting with people, what it takes to connect. I mean, we make a first impression within 8 seconds. Well, what are those impressionable aspects? Well, it's smiling, it's eye contact, it's open body posture. These things you can learn and you can practice. How do I get someone to actually want to keep talking to me? Well, it's likability. Ask them some curious questions to find out where you guys can connect. And I remember reading a story from a guy who was talking about this. He was on a cruise, and he said, here's what's crazy. I went on a cruise, and I found these guys from the same state that I was in and became best buddies with them. I didn't relate to them on any other thing. I did things that I never would have done, all because we found the likability factor of being from the same state. And so, it's silly, but yet when you think about it, we tend to like people who are like us, and we like people who like us. And I won't go through all of it, but it is a learnable science and an art. So if you apply yourself to it, these are skills that you can learn, and that's really the leadership skills I focus on teaching are just those things. I think there's one other important thing that you have to understand. We are an achievement-driven society right now. But again, if you really break down achievement, why are we all trying to pursue so much? Why are we trying to be known? Why are we trying? At the end of the day, we're looking for the acceptance of a relationship. We're just looking for love. I recently read Man's Meaning, or The Meaning of Life by Viktor Frankl. I think I got the title messed up. But here's what I remember. He said, love, when everything else is stripped away, love is the ultimate and highest goal for man to aspire to. Love, it's a relationship. And so we have to understand that these things that we think are important to us, the achievement, the aspirations, at the end of the day, what we really want is relationship. And let's make it valuable again, and let's pursue being great with human beings.
Much of what you and I have discussed over the past several minutes has related to interpersonal relationships and families and that kind of thing. There is a professional advancement side to all of this, and of course to what you're doing at Stop Clowning Around. Let's turn our attention in the remaining moments that we have to the leaders in business, in industry, in all forms of productivity, because being an effective leader there, or being someone who dreams of achieving a leadership position, relies on a lot of the conversation we've had, a lot of the topics you've discussed. I know you work directly with the John Maxwell organization for executive teaching. What does that chapter of your world look like as it pertains to our listeners? What would you like them to know from the Maxwell world?
I think Maxwell, if you really dive into all his stuff, it's still relational leadership. It really all can be boiled down to relational items. For my book, I had the opportunity to interview a ton of CEOs or C-level executives just to kind of, what were the skills that you feel are missing, the critical skills? And I would usually ask the question, what level of your success do you attribute to soft skills versus hard skills? And again, the soft skills are these relational skills. Hard skill is your ability to maybe build a computer. And over and over and over, 75 to 85% of their success was the development of these soft skills, the ability to deal with people, the ability to influence and inspire others to get behind a cause and a mission. So everything I do, whether that's with the Maxwell, whether it's with my own curriculums, and if someone really wants to move up that corporate ladder that you'll hear people talk about, your skill set has to change to be people-focused, not task-focused.
People-focused is not our strong point here in our culture these days.
Not at all.
We would like to think that we could turn our attention to some of our leadership for examples on how to be people-focused, but we can look to Washington, D.C., we're not going to see it. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, we can look to our state capitals, we're not going to see it. It reminds me that this kind of leadership and this kind of personal advancement and growth is probably going to flow from the bottom up instead of from the top down, which I guess is my way of saying that for those of you who are listening to this conversation and frustrated that you can't find examples of positive leadership when you turn on the news, for instance, maybe it's because it actually needs to start in your own home.
Amen.
In your own community, and then in your own church, and in your own state. And maybe it builds that way where the people stop accepting less than the best. Because right now, from a public discourse standpoint, we have forfeited an awful lot of what we actually value. We've just said, you know what, it's just not worth it. I'm not going to even enter into the conversation anymore because it's dangerous out there. It's too frustrating. I don't want to get called out. Or I think it starts at home, Scott.
I think you're right. Again, leadership, if we look at it biblically, before a person could be considered a leader of a church, the qualification was to be a leader at home first. I think it starts by leading yourself, leading your home, leading your business. I've witnessed way too many executives lose it all because the home leadership was very shaky. And when that foundation crumbled, they were not able to maintain or sustain the business side either. It all swept away. And you're right, it starts in the small. I remember a song, and I don't know who to attribute to. I can't even find it when I Google it. But I remember in my teen years, I heard a song that was one by one, the world will be one, W-O-N. And that's just always struck a chord with me because I do think that real influence comes by individuals taking the challenge and saying, I'm going to value other people. I'm going to give them the greatest gift ever, and that is to say, you are worth something. And I am going to encourage that worth. And if I can do that by one, the compound effect of that over time is limitless. And so I think we got to stop seeking achievement of trying to have this influential audience of 1 million people on Instagram, and let's start focusing on the humans around us.
Do you ever have a moment to reflect and look back and say, I was doing puppet shows. I was entertaining, and now I'm able to train. I mean, it's a kind of a remarkable journey when you look at what young Scott was compared to current. I didn't say old. I said current Scott. You ever look back and just say, man, Lord, you have brought me through a lot of stuff?
I do. And here it is. So for those that might be watching, here's a little journal I now use. And when I say journal, I think a lot of people get away from journaling because I don't want to write this big biography about myself. I try to make it a practice, and I'm not perfect in it, but I try to make it a practice to jot my wins down for the day. And they're usually really small. But I heard a statement that most human beings overestimate what we can do in a year, but we underestimate what we can do in a decade. And so I started thinking about that fact, and I'm like, wait a minute, if I write my wins down, in the day-to-day, it doesn't feel like I'm getting that far. But if I can then document this and look back over my year, look over my 5 years, my 10 years, the journey is amazing, astounding. And we're all making that journey, or we all have the capability to make that journey. And so, yeah, I would actually ask anyone or recommend anyone, hey, just jot down the small wins, because you forget that stuff. And it is so fun to look back a year later and say, oh, wow, look how far I came this year. It didn't feel like much in the moment, but you made great leaps.
Well, as I said in the opening to our conversation, I'm grateful to our listener and former guest on the show, Zach Tomlinson, for connecting the two of us. And we do invite you who are listening now, if you have an inspirational or encouraging story you'd like us to share, please let us know, because that's how we met Scott Holman. And I sure am glad that we did. Scott, thank you for your insight. Thanks for your passion on all these things. You. And again, the book and the website are stopclowningaround.com.
Absolutely.
You'll find info on the book there. We'll also put a link to the book in the podcast notes for those of you listening in podcast form. And hopefully one of these days, Scott, when we're not just confined to Zoom conversations, maybe we can break some bread together in person and swap stories.
I look forward to it, and I already know the perfect location.